Good evening. Tonight we're going to review this vinyl record and of course the music more than just the vinyl. But this is the vinyl record of Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band, a 1975 record by Deep Purple from the so-called Mark IV lineup. And so we're going to talk about the background of this album. It's got kind of an interesting backstory, particularly with all the personnel changes in the band, and then the Mark IV lineup, which included Glenn Hughes, Tommy Bolin, David Coverdale, Ian Pace, and of course Tommy Bolin. Then we're going to kind of talk about the album itself, some of the tracks on it, the style, some of the takeaways on the music itself, the follow-up of the album, which included a tour and some of the drama that went along with that tour, which ultimately led to the crashing and burning of Deep Purple as a band. And then I wanted to follow up with a few brief thoughts on the Mark IV lineup, and of course in particular the sad story of Tommy Bolin, who would maybe be remembered as the most significant thing about the album since he died really so soon after it was released. And there was so much hoopla when he joined the band, and then that happened. So we're also going to kind of finish up with Tommy Bolin. I'm going to play a little guitar. I usually play a couple guitar clips per video. It is a guitar channel after all, so don't go away. Each guitar clip's usually about 30 seconds, and then we'll get started with our review and discussion of Come Taste the Band by Deep Purple, the 1975 album. Okay, let's look at the album itself. There you can see the vinyl album on top of a guitar case, just for a nice color. It's in a vinyl, it's in a plastic sleeve. Let's pull it out of there. There, now you see it. One thing about the album, it came out in 1975. I think there was a drunken remark that was supposed to be Come Taste the Wine by Tommy Bolin, and he ended up accidentally saying Come Taste the Band. It ended up being the name of the album. But one takeaway, as another reviewer of this album pointed out, I actually kind of noticed it, and then one of the other reviews on YouTube for this album noted what a nice cover it is, and that's the case. It's a very, back in the 70s, you could tell a lot by the album cover. This was an attempt to kind of restart the band. It's got a pretty fancy album cover with all those photos. That kind of fold out type album cover information. I really miss album covers like that. Photography. There's the back with the track listing. Coming Home, Lady Luck, Getting Tighter, Dealer, I Need Love. Those are good songs. Drifter, Love Child, This Time Around. Ode to G, which is actually supposed to be Ode to G, I think people say. And You Keep On Moving. So quite a nice album. It's an attractive package, for sure. Well, let's start with a little bit of backstory to this album. This album was released in 1975 after a fair amount of drama in the band, behind the scenes, and probably not so behind the scenes. But they'd had a number of personnel changes. The classic lineup, just for the record, that a lot of people associate with the famous Deep Purple songs, those early 70s hard rock definitive anthem songs like Smoke on the Water, Highway Star. Is there a freaking better... Whatever you do, please do not play Highway Star in your car if you're driving late at night. That or Radar Love. You're better off, playing Russian roulette or something. That's a dangerous song to be listening to when you drive. Just great. But they'd been through some personnel changes. That's considered the Mark II lineup. All those classic, Deep Purple songs on Machine Head, Made in Japan, the live album. Roger Glover was kicked out of the band. Then Ian Gillan left the band, something in some order like that. They replaced him with a guy named David Coverdale, who of course went on to be famous with Whitesnake. And then Richie Blackmore left the band after Stormbringer, and that was a big hole. Ritchie Blackmore leaving, and I guess a lot of people might say even today that there's no Deep Purple without Ritchie Blackmore. But for some reason, because hey, there's some money involved, and maybe just because Deep Purple was a blast, rock and roll's fun, but they decided to keep it going, and so they replaced Ritchie Blackmore with the guy named Tommy Bolin. Now, I did a review of Tommy Bolin's Private Eyes album just the other night. You can look it up. I've listened to Private Eyes a lot. I had not heard this album that much. I remember seeing it in the record store all the time when I used to go in record stores in high school. I've never bought it. So I actually bought this album. I ordered it over eBay and found it pretty interesting. I had never listened to it. Then I've been listening to it quite a bit the last couple of days just so I could kind of think through this. But Tommy Bolin came on. He'd already been in the James Gang. He played with Billy Cobham. He played some with Moxie. So he was a young guy, and he kicked around some. But, he had some credentials for sure. And he was a great guitar player, and he had that kind of cock rock, if you forgive my French, that kind of cock rock swagger that Deep Purple wanted, kind of a true rock star. He looked like a rock star. So they put him on and went about recording this album. So let's talk a little bit about this album. This album has some great songs on it. I mean, you put this album on, and it's like listening to FM rock back in 1975, 76. You just it takes you right back to a certain kind of mid-70s hard rock that wasn't quite like early 70s hard rock. Deep Purple, Zeppelin, that's kind of early 70s hard rock. Or late 70s hard rock, which started to veer into metal and some other things. This is mid-70s hard rock. And you've got some great songs on here. Coming Home is really good. A couple takeaways I have from it, though. Tommy Bolin was from Sioux City, Iowa, and he makes it sound like an American album. Deep Purple was a British band, so he makes it. His guitar playing, and I play the guitar. His guitar playing was that kind of hard driving, Midwestern hard rock of the mid-70s. I think of guys like it. So to me, this album sounds like not early 70s, not late 70s, that mid-70s sweet spot period of the 70s, but it sounds like an American band. And it particularly reminded me of people like Rick Derringer, Ted Nugent, not the political Ted Nugent or the Ted Nugent that sings his own songs, but that first Ted Nugent solo album with Derek St. Holmes. Of course, that band didn't have keyboards, but the guitar style is that I would say it's that kind of hard driving Midwestern style. Early Styx, Kansas. All those bands kind of came out of the heartland, and there was a hard ass kicking type of guitar playing. And it wasn't just necessarily 3-chord, Chuck Berry type licks, although that was definitely part of it, but that just really hard driving Midwestern straight ahead rock and roll. I grew up with that and I love it. So when I hear it, in some ways it's just an electric guitar rock and roll, but there was a Midwestern sensibility about some of those guys, just like there was a Southern sensibility about Duane Allman, or you hear Jerry Garcia and you hear West Coast, When I hear this, I hear Midwestern, hard driving, mid-70s, heartland guitar playing. And it changes the flavor of Deep Purple. And that's maybe part of the reason some people say this isn't a real Deep Purple record. You don't have Ian Gillan, okay. And especially without Ritchie Blackmore, that's almost like Led Zeppelin without Jimmy Page, some might say. The other thing is John Lord is pretty toned down on this. It's mostly a guitar album. Now there's keyboards on it, and that does lend a flavor. I mentioned it reminds me some of the early Ted Nugent. When people hear Ted Nugent today, they think politics, or they think all that wango tango stuff he did, in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm talking about the early and mid 70s Ted Nugent when he had Derek St. Holmes with that real high, great rock and roll voice. That's some great music. And it kind of reminds me of that, but it doesn't have keyboards. Well, John Lord is kind of toned down on this. And when you do hear him, it's more of a keyboard synthesizer album, where if you think about the classic Purple sound, it was organ and sometimes boogie-woogie type piano, like on Woman from Tokyo. You hear those great piano, you know, just rock and roll piano, you know, not a keyboard, not a synthesizer. I mean, just, you know, somebody pounding away on a good piano, you know, that outro of Woman to Tokyo. But it was piano organ music, and Deep Purple was in their heyday was kind of an early 70s band, kind of a druggy band, a hippie band. They kind of wore jeans, kind of blousy clothes sometimes, a touch of the occult. I don't know if they were an occult band, but you know, they had that kind of dark edge that I think came out of the drug culture of hard rock at that time. Whereas by the mid 70s, I don't want to make it sound like drugs, but I think drugs had changed, a lot more cocaine. And this has that kind of mid 70s glitz to it. You know, it's kind of more glitz and glamour. And not like glam rock like Mott the Hoople, more like, what's the kind of pants they wear? Spandex, you know. You kind of picture spandex pants and, you know, fog hat. You know, those are great bands, but it's kind of that mid 70s hard rock, and it doesn't feel like the early 70s. The other thing is, when I heard this, I said, you know, you can also hear the late 70s music coming on, like, well, Whitesnake, obviously, with David Coverdale, but you hear, I think recording technology was better. You know, a lot of those classic albums by Deep Purple were done on the Rolling Stones mobile studio with 16 tracks, whereas this was done in a traditional studio, and I think just in those few years, technology was growing by leaps and bounds all that time. So this album is, I'm sure, more complexly produced. It's got those really packed high vocals that, you know, make it kind of sound like, you know, Kansas, some of those bands. You get that really high rock and roll singing, but it's, you know, harmonies that are just really close and packed in the speakers. It's got synthesizer on it. I think sometimes when people say they don't like this album, I think it's kind of maybe possibly one of those cases where they started adding synthesizer, and some people, you know, maybe some people don't play music and they don't notice it, but that happened to a lot of bands in the mid 80s, you know. Eddie Van Halen just died the other day, and I heard some people talking about when he added keyboards, you know, to a guitar band, but you know, or even going from, you can imagine like the Allman Brothers going from organ and piano to all of a sudden having like synthesizers, you know. It just, a lot of people out there might not know the difference if they don't play organ or piano or pay attention, but it sounds different and it gives a different flavor to the music. That's not necessarily bad, although if you like the classic hard rock sound, which was organ, you know, there was organ, you know, there was Three Dog Night was an organ guitar band, you know, and Three Dog Night rocked, by the way. They had some great commercial songs, but they rocked ass. And that was organ, you know, and the early 70s sound was, you know, hard rock guitar and organ, you know. Who played Green Eyed Lady, all that, was that Sugarloaf, you know, all that kind of stuff was organ. And this is, John Lord is not even, I wouldn't say he's prominent on this. You know, You Keep On Moving's got some nice keyboards, and Ode to G. You know, there's keyboards throughout this. But I wouldn't say it's prominent. You know, it's a Tommy Bolin album. The other thing I think about this album is it's great. It sounds great. It's definitely catchy. You know, Coming Home. I mean, there's some catchy ones. And so I'm not going to say the songwriting's bad. I think the songwriting's good. Tommy Bolin wrote most of the songs on here. I don't think the songwriting's bad, but I don't think it's as memorable as Ritchie Blackmore's songwriting. And you know, a band's only as good as their memorable songs. You know, that's what got so many bands back then. They might have great players, but if you don't have memorable songs, that's why the Beatles. How many bands? The Beatles were a great band, but I mean, how many bands could also had two good guitar players, bass, and a drummer, and sang pretty well, looked pretty good in a suit, but they didn't have the good songs of the Beatles, and you know that you could just go on and on. Why the Eagles, of all those kind of country rock bands in that period, why they rose out of all that to become what they are? Well, it's great songs. And this has good songs on it. It sounds good. They're professionally done. They're not bad songs. You know, sometimes you hear songs that are bad. These aren't bad songs, but they're not great songs, you know, and like Space Truckin', Highway Star, Smoke on the Water. You just hear those riffs and they're eternal, you know, and they have great songs. And I wouldn't say that this has good songs and great playing. It's well produced. I wouldn't say it has really top tier classic memorable songs for all time, which is what you're dealing with when you're talking about Deep Purple. You're not just talking about, you know, good songs and a good band. You're talking about some of the greatest songs in rock music history, and I wouldn't say the songwriting rises to that level. I even think Rick Derringer, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, you know, a lot of those bands that you hear that and, you know, it gets you, you know, and you kind of remember it, and it's not just good playing and, you know, well constructed this and that, but it's, you know, it's just, you hear the lyrics, everything puts it together, you know what it's about. Ain't exactly Shakespeare, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, but you do get the point. It gets the point across, so I guess that makes it effective, right? Which, you know, rock and roll all night, party every day. You know, it's not Tennyson, but hey, you know, it's communication in English, and in that sense, it's masterful. You know, it's masterful use of the English language, and I wouldn't say the songwriting on this is of that tier. And I'm not saying it's bad songwriting. I'm just comparing it to that tier of really great songwriting, you know, which is what Deep Purple has in their catalog. Woman from Tokyo is on Who Do We Think We Are? I guess some people think that album was disappointing, but it's another example of great songwriting and a great riff. Bum, 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 you know, that's, you hear that, and it's not just, oh wow, he's a really good guitar player. Wow, that's a really good band. You hear it, and you know, it sticks in your head the rest of your life, literally, because it's not just great guitar playing, it's a great idea, and it's a very catchy, expressive idea. It's not, you know, I mean, it's creative and all that, but it's an expressive, you know, it captures a feeling so well, as do all those great Deep Purple songs, you know. And I wouldn't say the songwriting on this rises to the level. When you put it on, though, it's a good hard rock mid-70s album. And like I said, it fits right in. We're moving into stadium rock, and you know, the mid-70s was a good party, but it wasn't the same as the early 70s. You know, the hair was a little different, still long, but you know, little more blow dryers and things out, and you know, and shampooing a little more often, and you know, it was just a little different time. Great music. I love the mid-70s. I love, you know, Foghat. Aerosmith kind of comes out of that to an extent. A lot of their albums are kind of that vintage. I think that's my takeaway on this. It's a great album. Getting Tighter is, I mean, there's some great riffs on there. Reminds me a lot of Rick Derringer, Edgar Winter for some reason when I hear it. But that's my takeaway, is it does not have the truly great songwriting that Deep Purple's associated with. And it's not that it's bad songwriting, nobody's saying that, but we're talking about great songwriting that's in a league with Smoke on the Water, that's in a league with Highway Star, that's in a league with Space Truckin' and Lazy and Woman from Tokyo and Burn and all those songs that Ritchie Blackmore is associated with. I wouldn't say there's one song on this album that rises to that level, which isn't even fair. I mean, that's a huge level. Which brings me to my next point, which is what might have been for the Mark IV lineup with Tommy Bolin and Glenn Hughes had that, you know what, occurred. Because maybe that was in the cards. You know, Deep Purple's first couple albums aren't you know, they kind of were finding their sound. They made a few lineup changes and finally started coming out with their classic albums in the Mark II lineup. So what might have been, you know, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Well, this is a good album, so I didn't mean to criticize it. It is a good album, but you know, I don't think it rises to the level of what Deep Purple is, which isn't just a good band. It's one of the most important great bands of all time. You know, really, you know, top tier hard rock band. But it makes you think what might have been. That's a really powerful thing. Well, Deep Purple took a tour. Everybody probably knows this if you're a Deep Purple fan, with Tommy Bolin and Glenn Hughes. Those two in particular had drug problems. Tommy Bolin was apparently a closet heroin addict, I think he plays great on here, but I was watching a video the other night and they were saying, you know, a lot of shows he couldn't play, which is really sad because if you think about it, Tommy Bolin was a great guitar player, and this was his shot. He'd been in the James Gang. He was always the replacement guy. You know, he'd been in the James Gang, then he got a job in Deep Purple. And let me tell you something about this album. This album is better than the two Tommy Bolin solo albums, I think. I think the material, the songwriting on those two Tommy Bolin solo albums should have been played by Deep Purple, because the band on this is kick ass. It's Deep Purple, minus Richie Blackmore. I mean, you know, you had a couple of personnel changes, but the band on this blows away the band on his two solo albums. And just, it's too bad that, you know, when you play with a great band, it pushes you to the next level. You know, the players in Deep Purple were so good. There's that energy. There's always that movement. No matter what they're doing, it has intensity and it pushes. And when they play, a lot of times, even if it's just kind of bass lines and stuff, everything's moving around in a tasteful but energetic way all the time. That's what drives a great band, is just movement. And I think this is the best guitar playing I've ever heard Tommy Bolin do, and I grew up listening to Private Eyes a lot, which is a good album. I think this shows the tragedy of Tommy Bolin, because I don't know about the songwriting aspect, but I think this is the best guitar playing I've ever heard Tommy Bolin do, and it's because he was playing with Deep Purple. He was playing with one of the greatest bands ever. And yeah, he kicked ass on this album, but then he went out and, you know, it's so sad. You know, they said he was really hit or miss, and towards the end, more miss. And same with Glenn Hughes, by the way, but particularly Tommy Bolin. And so the band kind of blew up in March of 1976 after a really bad show. That, you know, the three players that were trying to be straight and sober and play well, just basically walked off. And Tommy Bolin was did Private Eyes, which came out, I believe, in September. He recorded it in June. I checked this today. So think about this: Tommy Bolin, basically, that's being fired from Deep Purple. They disbanded the band, but they didn't. There was so much hope in the band. John Lord, Ian Pace, and even David Coverdale, but Ian Pace and John Lord were the two founding members. They're basically firing Tommy Bolin because they were going to break up the band before they did this album. So when they say they were breaking up the band, that was basically the way of saying to Tommy Bolin, "This isn't working out with you and Glenn Hughes. We're done." And it was kind of blowing up the band, which was a form, when you think about the context, it was kind of like firing Tommy Bolin. He recorded Private Eyes in June. It came out in September. He was touring warming up for Jeff Beck and Peter Frampton, but he was warming up for Jeff Beck, and he was in Deep Purple. So if you think about it, I really started to hit me when I listened to this album how good his playing is on it, and how much promise there was probably when this album came out, and then that tour was, there was so much drugs involved, especially towards the end of it, or there are multiple shows, and then the band blows up. That's so sad. They obviously didn't mean for that to happen. They intended to keep playing for years and years. They had a new album out, and so it was a big disaster. And Tommy Bolin died in December. But this is the best I've ever heard Tommy Bolin play, because he's playing with a great band, a great drummer, a great bass player, and a great keyboard player, and that's going to drive you. David Coverdale's a great singer. I would say. Tommy Bolin sings on Private Eyes, I think, mostly, and it's fine. He doesn't have an unpleasant voice, but David Coverdale's like a artist singer. He's a singer. So he had all the stuff. He was in Deep Purple, and basically that band blew up, and which was a type of being fired by Deep Purple. He recorded a solo album, which I don't think is as good as this. I think the material on it's good. Some of the guitar playing's on it's good, but I just don't think the band he had on that album was like John Lord and Ian Pace or Glenn Hughes. I forget who was on that album. So it's very sad. And so the thing that my takeaway is what might have been really with this Mark IV lineup. And then my other takeaway, just to reiterate, is that I don't think the songs were as good. So they weren't coming up with anything as to hit you with that good feeling. Not just like energy and all that. It's got all that, but that good feeling that comes from that kind of, it's like that connection of body, mind, and spirit when you hear like "Woman from Tokyo." It's more than just a good beat. It's the whole package, and it's the images and the memorable melodic riffs and so on that are so catchy. And I don't think it has that. But it is a good hard rock band, and I think it's better than anything I've ever heard Tommy Bolin do. Now, I haven't heard that Billy Cobham. People keep talking about that. So, I mean, I don't even think that's really a controversial statement. Deep Purple is one of the greatest bands in the history of rock, and Tommy Bolin was in it, replacing Richie Blackmore. But he had that rhythm section, some version of it. John Lord, he could still be with them today, maybe. Definitely could have, and I guess don't do heroin. Sad. It's sad. Well, we will see you. That was my take. I always toss a couple little guitar clips in there. So hope you watch. Take care.